Fountainhead here with another special report. Bioshock is one of the more unique games of recent memory because it's fixed and fine philosophical grounding and it tells a corker of a story, but without sacrificing the game mechanics to make it a fun interactive experience and not just a long series of unskippable cutscenes. The game uses Ayn Rand's Atlas Shrugged as a narrative framework, but designer Ken Levine resolved the game mechanics first before adding objectivist window dressing. But it does spin quite the yarn, and many would argue that this 2007 title was the first to really advance the idea of games as art. And while cantankerous geezers like Roger Ebert would never admit that interactive experiences can be art, the medium's come a long way since a crude approximation of table tennis. It certainly didn't hurt Bioshock's artistic credentials that it was an aesthetic delight, especially the preponderance of Art Deco. But why was Bioshock, and by extension the fictional city of Rapture, so obsessed with this early 20th century design style? Especially since Bioshock takes place at least 15 years after Art Deco faded from prominence. Let's take a look. Art Deco was a collection of interrelated styles paying homage to modernist influences like Cubism that formed in early 20th century France. It took its name retroactively from the International Exhibition of Modern Decorative and Industrial Arts, a 1925 World's Fair held in Paris, though the style existed before that. It emphasized bold geometric shapes and sharp lines, and because it utilized rare and expensive materials like ebony and ivory, Art Deco became associated with luxury, glamour, and industrial grandeur. When it crossed the Atlantic and infiltrated the States through architecture, vehicles, artwork, and all manner of fine craftsmanship, it came to personify the Second Industrial Revolution with a belief in technological and social progress. So naturally, the style became inextricably linked with the esteemed industrialists of the so-called Gilded Age, men whom Ayn Rand extolled with her objectivist philosophy in novels like The Fountainhead and Atlas Shrugged. It's the latter that would lay the philosophical groundwork for Bioshock and set the plot in motion. Bioshock's main antagonist, Andrew Ryan, is a composite of several Randian characters, but especially Atlas Shrugged's John Gall, the heroic figure who stops the motor of the world by convincing the titans of industry to abandon their posts and join him in a capitalist utopia where big government can't touch them. Of course, the biggest difference between that particular utopia, Galt's Gulch, and Rapture is that the former functions as a well-oiled objectivist paradise, while the latter quickly turns into a dystopian hellscape. And what's interesting is that Bioshock isn't really a comprehensive critique of objectivism. Andrew Ryan's greatest sin was his failure to live up to his own ideals. The prequel novel Bioshock Rapture delves a bit more into political theory and why Ryan's utopia might have been doomed from the start, but the crux of the blame still rests with one man's hypocrisy. The man who advocated unregulated, laissez-faire capitalism and absolute personal freedom ended up nationalizing his competitor's business, Fontaine Futuristics, and installing a security apparatus that rivaled the Gestapo. With his feet to the fire, Andrew Ryan betrayed his personal philosophy. It's a philosophy that was woven into the very fabric of Rapture, from the rules, or lack thereof, to the architecture. Rapture's aquatic skyline, one of gaming's all-time wondrous sights, was a direct reflection of old New York City and its Art Deco splendor. But why Art Deco? The story of Bioshock really begins about 15 years before the events of the game, at the tail end of World War II, when Art Deco had begun to give way to a more subdued modernist style. Andrew Ryan was apoplectic at the atomic destruction of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, and his belief in the inevitability of nuclear war propelled the creation of Rapture. It was there that he and his chosen philosophical fellow travelers would ride out to destruction on the surface world and live in a community where the artist would not fear the censor, where the scientist would not be bound by petty morality, where the great would not be constrained by the small. Ryan wanted to turn back the clock to before the atomic age, to before the New Deal massively expanded the size and scope of the federal government. So it's only natural that he'd gravitate towards the art style most symbolic of the Second Industrial Revolution, when Ryan's ideal of the self-made man reigned supreme. Art Deco was never a political movement, and Ayn Rand never hitched her wagon to any particular artistic and architectural style. It was more about the meaning behind those creative endeavors than anything specific. Even with Ayn Rand's Fountainhead, where the hero is an architect, the story doesn't necessarily endorse one particular style. Rand apparently based Howard Rourke, Fountainhead's protagonist, on Frank Lloyd Wright, who adhered more to the prairie style of architecture versus Art Deco. But Rourke owed his main allegiance to a modern style of architecture that isn't beholden to legacy designs. And in the time period the Fountainhead is set, the 20s and 30s, Art Deco was very much state-of-the-art. So even though Ayn Rand didn't specifically endorse Art Deco, it and objectivism were definitely running mates. Especially since Art Deco came to signify wealth, opulence, and mass production. And the prequel novel solidifies this connection between Art Deco and Andrew Ryan. Rapture's architecture and design was a fusion of the style of the World's Fair of 1934, an event that had a great impact on Andrew Ryan, and the industrial grandiosity of the art of the Great Chain. That particular World's Fair was the 1933-34 Century of Progress, a grand showcase for industrial brilliance and Art Deco design. Now, from the perspective of Ken Levine and other game designers, Art Deco is an important visual metaphor unto itself. Because Art Deco is such a palpable throwback to the Gilded Age, it's often used as a critique of the period. One critic noted that in fiction, Art Deco is often used to represent the misguided optimism, flawed ideals, and darker aspects of the setting. Furthermore, the prequel novel underscores Rapture's aesthetic and cultural bubble. The game begins proper in 1960, when the world had begun to embrace rock and roll, but Rapture remained mired in the jazz and big band music that dominated the 20s, 30s, and 40s. Not coincidentally, the heyday of Art Deco. Even in 1945, when Ryan's underwater objectivist paradise begins to take shape, and especially in 1960 when the game begins, Art Deco is a dying art in the surface world. But in Rapture, and its architecture, voluminous statues, and artwork, it fit Andrew Ryan's philosophy perfectly. Thanks for joining me for another special report. Please remember to like this video and subscribe to my televisual program, and I'll see you next time. This is Jimmy Midnight signing off.